Kaleab, not Caleb. That's my pet peeve. So today, let me introduce myself. I'm a political science major with a minor in history. So some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about is going to be relevant to my major. So what we're going to be talking about is globalization. I first came to hear this word in 6th grade in my history class when my history professor, a teacher rather, told me, Caleb, globalization is going to be a big factor by the time you're going to be graduating college, and it's around that time now. And I feel like, you know, he was right in the sense that we are now, maybe not idealistically the same, like the globe is not the same, but we are more similar than we are different, and we see that through social media, stuff like that. Let me continue. My first supporting claim is that stability is crucial in trying to achieve globalization. As I said, although I doubt in trying to achieve globalization completely, because that would be far-fetched and not realistic, I feel like that we can achieve it, and in order to achieve it, that we must help one another, and without expecting something in return. So I want to talk about particularly Syria. So, foreign assistance with the intent of self-gain or national interest has negative implications and therefore will not get us to that globalization that I was talking about. So let's shift our focus to Syria, and seeing as how the international community has acted towards Syria in the past, 3 years has been since the civil war started. And we can say for the most part that nations have not intervened fully, although U.S. has been a big one of the nations in trying to settle the dispute there, and some Iran as well, and Saudi Arabia and all this stuff. But there's a common ground with all those nations is that they all have self-interest. The United States doesn't want Assad regime to continue because he's been aiding Hezbollah, Hamas, terrorist groups that pose a threat to the United States. So therefore, they want him out of place. The Iran want Assad in place because that's their way of creating stability around that area. Saudi was quite the opposite. Not the same interest as the United States, but their interest being getting rid of Assad would mean that Sunnis would take charge and they'd be better off. Was it Sunnis or Shia? But okay. So to continue on, the United States and its past interventions and wars. You can talk about the Korean War, and you can say, well, the United States had no interest there. Well, of course they did. They were trying to contain communism, right? You can say the same about Vietnam, or currently, Libya, where most European nations, such as Europe, France, Italy, many EU member nations intervened in Libya because they had self-interest. They wanted, gas prices were going up because Gaddafi was just, going insane. So always, self-interest is crucial, and if we have that in place, I don't think it's globalization is achievable. To continue on, one of the obligations of developed nations such as the United States, as stated in the UN Charter, is to assist underdeveloped nations, be it Syria, or African nations, or what have you. And so, in talking about that, the opposition would say that the United States and the Western world are, doing more than helping a helping hand, giving more than a helping hand, and that we should stop intervening because, we have played the police of the world since the end of World War I, I guess, and that U.S. intervention should, stop and should be limited because, we're just getting in a mess. We can say Iraq, Afghanistan, still self-interest in place there as well. Another perfect example is the more current issue of Ukraine, which, is a nation most of us probably didn't hear of until recently, right? Because the United States, well, not really, they didn't really have interest in Ukraine until Russia took over Crimea, and the interest of the EU trying to pull in Ukraine into an EU nation, became kind of diminished since Moscow is now taking over the biggest source that the European Union might have, and that is Crimea, or however you want to pronounce it. And So I want to talk about like how turmoil in one nation has negative implications for neighboring states, as we can go back to Syria to look at that now. And we see neighboring states, nations such as Lebanon, having the effect of that a war going right next door. So if we don't have nations such as the United States, EU, or developed nations, Germany, China, what have you, assisting in hope of getting, something in return, or as I've mentioned earlier, self-interest or national interest, that the world will be a better place. And in conclusion, I would like to inquire that world leaders and nations help one another without expecting something in return. As it's said in one great book, I don't know if you guys have heard of this before, but it said, don't let your left hand see what your right hand is giving. So, thank you.
Kaleab, right?
Column.
It threw me off because your teacher in high school said Caleb, and I went, I know that's not right.
Kaleab. All right. Kaleab, I think you need to start with a much clearer proposition. I think the inference that you're making as I'm listening to the argument is that it is not possible to achieve globalization under the current political conditions. That sounds to me like what your proposition ought to be, and I don't think that you've got that expressed very clearly. I had to dig around and figure out ultimately what your argument was, because there's not a propositional statement at the beginning of the speech. I know what the topic area is, but I don't know what inference you want us to make. The secondary issues are not previewed and structured for us. They appear to be based around examples that you're talking about, and I think they're interesting examples, but your description of them is sometimes a little bit incomplete. There's not a single source cited in the presentation in support of any of your information. Even that last quote that you talked about, at best it's a vague citation. A great book, I don't know if any of you have heard of it, Don't Let the Left Hand See What the Right Hand's Getting. I'm going, well, I don't know what book that is. It sounds like a fortune cookie to me. I'm not exactly sure why that's credible as evidence either. I don't think that you've distorted information on some of these points, but I think you are certainly oversimplifying it in some context, and I'm not exactly sure that those political contexts have to do with the same issues of globalization that your history teacher was talking about, or your sociology teacher was talking about when you were younger. When we're talking about globalization, I'm not sure that that meant that there was a one world government, or that people would be free to move between nations without any restrictions. I think globalization, as most people visualize it, is the interdependence of nations on one another, and I think some of the examples that you showed prove that there is in fact a substantial amount of interdependence. In fact, maybe there are problems with being as globalized as we are, because we are affected by actions that are taken around the world in countries that we don't have a direct interest in, but there are long-term consequences to those actions. So I think the problem here is that you're not very well focused on what it is you want us to believe, and then finding evidence to support those points was a secondary issue. All right, thank you.